Evelyn Ashcroft was born during a blood eclipse, marked by darkness before she drew her first breath. They said she was cursed. They said she would bring ruin. They were right about the ruin. They were simply wrong about who caused it. The night Evelyn Ashcroft was born, the moon tried to swallow itself. It began as it always did, a silver disk hanging fat and cold above the Vareth realm, casting light across the Wolf Road and the pine-black mountains where three great coalitions had carved their territories into the ancient stone. Then the shadow came. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once, a darkness sliding across the moon's face like a hand pressed over a wound. The blood came next. That was the part the old stories always mentioned, the way the moon bled before it disappeared, staining the sky in deep arterial red before the full dark swallowed it entirely. The blood eclipse. It happened perhaps once in a generation. And in the century since the last one, the wolves of the Vareth realm had forgotten what it meant. They had reduced it to superstition, to something grandmothers whispered about, that a child born in the belly of an eclipse was marked by the void. Kissed by the dark between the stars. Cursed. When Marin Ashcroft's labor pains tore through her at the height of the eclipse, the midwives went pale. When the child arrived, small, impossibly quiet, her eyes wide and dark in the bloodied light, no one spoke for a long time. The child did not cry. She simply looked, as though she were waiting for something. As though she recognized the darkness. They named her Evelyn. And for 23 years, the Vareth realm watched her carefully, kept its distance thoughtfully, and waited for whatever catastrophe she would inevitably bring. They were right about the catastrophe. They were simply wrong about who would cause it. The convergence fire burned tall and white at the center of the gathering, and Evelyn stood at its edge and watched everything unravel. She had known this night would change things. The same way she always knew, not through vision or premonition exactly, but through the peculiar awareness that had lived in her bones since birth. A stillness that arrived before storms. A quiet that settled around her when something was about to break. It had been quiet for 3 days. The solstice convergence drew every wolf of consequence in the Vareth realm to the neutral territory of Greyvale Basin, alphas and betas and council representatives from all three coalitions, their mates and heirs, their warriors standing at careful distance from one another like predators sharing a watering hole. The air crackled with politics and old grievances and the particular tension of wolves trying very hard not to shift in public. Evelyn stood with the Ashvin delegation, close enough to be visible, far enough to signal what she was. She had long ago learned the geometry of belonging to a pack that was not entirely sure it wanted her. She felt the mate bond before she saw him. It arrived without warning, a golden thread pulling taut in her chest, so sudden she pressed a hand to her sternum. Her wolf rose instinctively, attention sharpening to a single point across the fire. Alpha Theron Voss. He stood with the Greystone delegation, which she noted distantly was strange, an Ashvin alpha lingering at the Dominion's edge. He was everything the realm had decided an alpha should be, broad-shouldered, composed, handsome in the severe way of men who had never doubted their own worth. His bond light, that faint luminescence every well-connected wolf carried in their skin, glowed a steady, reassuring gold. Their eyes met through the fire. Evelyn felt it land in her chest like something she had been waiting for her entire life. And she watched the exact moment he felt it, too. His eyes widened. His expression shifted, surprise giving way to something calculating, something she could not name. Then he straightened and looked away and said something to the Greystone Alpha standing at his shoulder. The Greystone Alpha. Davin Crane. Whose daughter Isolde stood precisely 2 steps behind him, wearing a necklace that matched the crest on Theron's ceremonial armor. Evelyn understood then. She understood before he crossed the distance to her, before he stopped a careful 3 feet away and looked at her with eyes full of apology dressed up as resolve. She understood before he opened his mouth. The bond is real, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Those were the first words he ever spoke to her. His acknowledgement was gentle. Thorough. A knife with a polished handle. I don't deny what I feel. Then he laid it out plainly. His pack needed the Dominion's alliance. The Dominion would not ally with a pack whose alpha had bonded himself to an Eclipseborn. The stories were too old, the fear too deep, and political survival was not a luxury he could discard for a bond. Some sacrifices, he said carefully, were heavier than others. He didn't call her cursed. He never said broken. He was far too intelligent and far too careful for cruelty. He simply chose, out loud, in full view of the gathered realm, to step away from the mate bond like it was a door he could close softly on his way out. Isolde Crane watched from across the fire with an expression of composed triumph. The rejection hit Evelyn not in one wave but in 100 small ones, each aftershock finding a different piece of her and quietly dismantling it. The golden thread in her chest went dark. Her wolf recoiled, then went utterly still in a way that was more frightening than howling would have been. Evelyn held herself very straight. She said nothing. Because what was there to say? He had been kind. He had been reasonable. He had stood in front of 1,000 wolves and explained with perfect political logic why she was not worth keeping, and the worst part, the part that would take her months to stop hearing, was that he had not even been wrong about any of it. The realm did fear her. It always had. She turned and walked away from the convergence fire before anyone could see her face. She did not run. Running would have told them what she felt. But her wolf was silent inside her, for the first time in her life. And the silence was the most terrifying thing she had ever known. The failing started 3 weeks later. Not the grief was clean, a sharp expected thing she could press against and feel the edges of. She had been rejected. She had survived the night of it, and the morning after, and the week of strange pitying glances from packmates who were not sure how to look at her now. What she had not expected was the fracturing. It began with her hands. She woke to find patches of dark fur running up her forearms, her wolf bleeding through her skin without permission or provocation. She sat in her cabin and stared at them before they receded. The next morning it was her eyes. She caught her reflection in a basin of water and her irises were burning red, wolf eyes in a human face, and she did not remember willing the shift. Her pack's healer, old Mira, came to see her. Mira examined her hands, her eyes, the silver-black tinge that had entered the veins visible at Evelyn's wrists. Then she sat back and was quiet. The failed bond is accelerating your eclipse nature, she said finally. Your wolf needs anchoring, to a mate, to a pack, to something strong enough to hold the two halves of you together. Without it, they'll keep bleeding into each other. And what happens when they finish bleeding? Evelyn asked. Myra's silence was its own kind of answer. Evelyn stopped attending pack meals. Not because of shame was an emotion she had made peace with long ago, but because she could feel their fear, and she had spent a lifetime refusing to make herself smaller to accommodate other people's fear, and she was very tired. She spent her days in the archive instead. The Ashvin pack maintained one of the oldest libraries in the realm, centuries of records, treaties, astronomical charts, and texts that predated the 3 coalitions. Most of it was in the common tongue. Some of it was in the old script, the writing of the first pack, the ancestor wolves, which no one living could read. No one except her. She had discovered this at 16, alone in this same archive on a rainy afternoon, turning the pages of a text that had supposedly been decorative for 3 generations. The symbols had simply resolved themselves in her vision like a language she had always spoken. She had told no one. She had the instinct even then that certain gifts were safer kept secret. Now, with time running out in ways she was still calculating, she read. The texts were old. Older than the coalitions, older than the current territory borders, older than the solstice convergence itself. They spoke of cycles and of power, of a place called the Firstspring, the source point of all wolf essence, buried in the hollow peaks at the heart of the realm. Every wolf's bondlight originated there, drawn through the earth like water through roots. They also spoke of war. Coming war, written with a specificity that sent a chill across her skin, a dominant coalition, drunk on expansion, moving on the Firstspring to seize it. To control the very source of what made wolves wolves. The Greystone Dominion. Theron Voss had allied himself with a coalition in the process of planning the suppression of every other pack in the realm. And buried at the end of the oldest text, in script so fine she had to press her face nearly against the page, a single passage. Only the eclipsed can open the Firstspring's gate. Only the eclipsed, who stands between the living and the first, can speak the words that seal or free it. Evelyn sat back. Her wolf was still silent. But something else moved in the deep of her, something old and patient and absolutely certain. She had one asset left. And she knew exactly who needed to hear what she had found. The problem was getting them to listen before she fell entirely apart. The ironbound Confederation's territory began where the Ashvin Range turned to shale, a landscape that looked like the earth had given up on softness and decided to be only bones. Evelyn crossed into it on the fourth day of riding, alone, without telling her pack anything except that she was leaving. She had expected to be stopped at the border. She had not expected to be escorted by 8 warriors with the look of people who had never once laughed. They brought her to Ravenhollow, the Confederation's seat, carved into the side of a mountain and reinforced over generations into something that had stopped being a fortress and become simply a fact. The stone halls were hung with territorial maps instead of tapestries. Every surface had the quality of a thing built to be useful rather than beautiful. She approved of it. They kept her waiting in a stone antechamber for 2 hours. She used the time to observe what she could through the narrow windows, warriors running drills with a precision that suggested they expected war in the near future, supply wagons being logged with careful efficiency, a beta moving through the yard with the expression of someone managing a great many calculations simultaneously. The Confederation was already preparing. They just did not know yet what they were preparing for. She had heard the name Cale Dawnraker since childhood. The Ironbound's alpha was the kind of figure that drifted through other packs' political conversations as a variable. Unpredictable. Brilliant. Dangerous in the particular way of people who fought for something instead of from something. He had built the Confederation from 9 scattered packs who had nothing in common except that the larger coalitions had tried to absorb them all. He was also, by every account, done with the concept of mate bonds. His mate, Lyra Dawnraker, had been killed in a border skirmish 3 years ago, one that the Dominion had quietly facilitated and that Theron Voss had helped cover up. The Confederation knew. They had no proof. Yet. Cale Dawnraker entered the antechamber without announcement. He was nothing like Theron, which was the first thing she noticed. Where Theron was composed, carefully, deliberately composed, the composure of a man managing his presentation, this man was simply still. The stillness of terrain. His dark hair was cut short and he had the kind of face that did not give you much, strong jaw, watchful gray eyes, a scar along his left temple that he had clearly never bothered to explain. He was wearing working clothes, not ceremonial ones. He looked at her the way a person looks at a problem they have been expecting. "Miss Ashcroft," he said. Not sarcastically. Just informatively. She blinked. "You know who I am." "I knew an eclipse-born wolf from the Ashvin pack had crossed my border asking for an audience. The realm isn't so large." He moved to the chair across from hers and sat, unhurried. "You were Theron Voss's fated mate." "Yes." "He rejected you." "Yes." "You're here because of that." "No." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm here because of what I found after." Something shifted in those gray eyes. Marginal. But present. She put the copied pages on the table between them, her careful transcriptions of the old text, translated into the common tongue. She watched him look at them, then look at her. "This is old script," he said. "Who translated it?" "I did." He was quiet for a moment. Eclipseborn can read the old tongue. It was not a question. Which meant he already knew it, or suspected it. She filed that away. "Among other things," she said. He picked up the first page and read. She watched his face and saw very little on it, which itself told her something. A person who had learned to keep the interior separate from the surface. But when he reached the passage about the Firstspring, his hand stilled slightly on the page. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at her. "Tell me everything," he said. "And don't decide what I need to know. Tell me all of it." So she did. He did not believe her immediately. She had not expected him to. What followed was 3 days of what Evelyn could only describe as systematic interrogation delivered in a civil tone. Cale assigned her a chamber, assigned her a guard, more escort than jailer, she thought, though the distinction was subtle, and then proceeded to challenge every piece of her translation in sessions that ran from morning until her hands were shaking from the failing bond. He noticed the shaking. He said nothing about it. The sessions were unlike anything she had experienced. He did not dismiss her. He did not defer to her, either. He pushed. When her translation made an interpretive leap, he wanted her to justify it. When she cited a text reference, he pulled the record and cross-checked it. He had an archive she had expected from the maps covering his walls, extensive, organized, annotated in a handwriting so small she needed a magnifying lens. On the second day, she pushed back. "You've already decided I'm not lying," she said, looking up from the documents spread between them. "You wouldn't have kept me here if you thought this was fabricated. So what are you actually doing?" He looked at her for a moment. "Making sure you understand what you're asking me to act on," he said. "Because if I mobilize the Confederation based on a misread translation of a century-old text, I endanger 9 packs. I'd like to be thorough." "You're also deciding whether to trust me," she said. "Yes," he said. "That too." She appreciated the honesty enough that she forgave him the extra day. On the third night, she was in the courtyard alone. She had taken to walking at night when the failing bond ached too loudly for sleep, when he appeared beside her without announcement, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through spaces. They stood in silence for a moment. She was looking at the hollow peaks visible on the horizon. He was looking at her hands, where the dark patches of fur had appeared again. "How long?" he asked. "Since the rejection." "About 6 weeks now." She kept her voice flat. "It's getting faster." He said nothing for a moment. "Is it painful?" he asked. She considered this. "Yes and no. It's more that I can feel the 2 parts of me trying to occupy the same space." Her wolf stirred at that, restless. Like being pulled in a direction without being able to stop moving. Another silence. It was, she was discovering, a particular kind of silence, not empty but occupied. He carried his quiet the way the mountains carried the dark, as a thing that had always been there. "My mate's name was Lyra," he said, without preamble. Evelyn didn't say anything. She waited. "She was afraid of nothing and patient about everything," he said. "She would have asked me to trust you before I'd finished the first page of your translation." He paused. "She was usually right," he said. "About people." Evelyn looked at him then. He was still looking at the mountains. "I'm sorry," she said. "Genuinely." He nodded once. "Then, I believe your translation. I believe the Dominion is moving on the Firstspring. And I believe you're the only one who can open the gate." He finally looked at her. "I don't know if I can ask that of you." She frowned. "Why not?" "Because the texts say it costs the Eclipsed something." He met her eyes steadily. "And I don't like spending other people's resources without accounting for the price." Something unnamed moved through her chest. "That's a very unusual thing for an alpha to say," she said carefully. The ghost of something crossed his face. Almost a smile, but more reserved than that. "So I've been told," he said. That night, for the first time since the convergence, Evelyn slept without dreaming of golden threads gone dark. The intelligence came 2 weeks later, delivered by a scout who had a talent for going unnoticed that bordered on supernatural. The Dominion was mobilizing. 3 of their war packs were moving toward the hollow peaks, disguised as a territorial survey, a fiction so thin it was not meant to be believed, only to provide political cover while they moved. They had 8 days. Maybe 10. The War Council convened in Cale's largest strategy room, and Evelyn attended it. Not as a guest. She had been attending councils for 2 weeks now, initially because Cale had asked her to translate old script documents his intelligence network had acquired, and then, gradually, then suddenly, because she had started contributing to strategy discussions and no one had told her to stop. She suspected this was because Cale had not told her to stop. The room held 7 people: Cale, his beta Marin Solt, a former Dominion wolf who had defected with half her pack 7 years ago and apparently had not smiled since, his intelligence chief, a laconic man called Brix, 2 allied Alpha representatives, a cartographer named Wren, and Evelyn. They argued for 4 hours. Marin wanted to take 300 warriors and hold the physical approaches, burn the entry passes if necessary. Brix wanted to let the Dominion enter and trap them in the interior. The Allied Alphas wanted to invoke a neutrality accord buried in the Ashvin Treaty documents that would require Theron Voss to publicly oppose the Dominion, something he would desperately prefer not to do. The cartographer wanted better maps. Evelyn listened to all of it. Then she unrolled the oldest text she had brought, the one with the gate passage, and placed it alongside the topographical map. "The Firstspring isn't in the interior," she said. Everyone went quiet. She traced the map with her finger. The texts describe a specific geographic formation. This ridge here. The spring is beneath it, and the gate is accessible only from this approach. There are 2 others, but they lead nowhere, dead ends the first pack built as misdirection. She looked up. "The Dominion scouts have better maps than anyone alive," she said. "But they don't have this. They'll lose 3 days minimum on the wrong approaches." She looked at Cale. "We need to be at the gate in 7 days. Not 8. 7. The room was quiet. Marin Solt looked at Cale with an expression that said she was waiting to see what he did with this. Cale studied the map. "Then, how confident are you?" "Completely." He nodded once. "Marin, revise the mobilization plan. We move in 2 days." After the council, Evelyn stayed to roll the maps. She felt his presence before she heard him, she always did now, which was a thing she was carefully not examining. "You've been doing well for 2 weeks, he said. "I wondered when you'd stop pretending you were only here to translate." She looked at him. He had the faintest expression of amusement. It was the first time she had seen anything approaching it on his face, and she found, to her considerable irritation, that it changed him slightly. Made him seem less like a fact of nature and more like a person. "I wasn't pretending," she said. "I am here to translate." "You're here because the realm is in danger and you're the only person alive who can do what needs to be done," he said. "But you're also," he paused, considering, "a strategist. Whether you want to call it that or not." He left before she could find an answer. She stood there longer than necessary, looking at the maps. Her wolf, which had been increasingly chaotic for weeks, was very still. Attentive. Angled toward the door he had left through. She told her wolf firmly to mind its own business. Her wolf did not listen. She showed him the liminal on the 5th day of their march to the Hollow Peaks. Not because she had planned to. Because she lost control. It happened at dusk, when the light went strange and she stopped in the middle of the road with 600 Confederation warriors flowing around her like water around a stone. Her wolf surged and did not stop surging. The failing bond and the proximity to the first pack's ancient power had been building for days, and suddenly the threshold was everywhere. She entered the liminal without meaning to. It was not like falling asleep. It was more like the world thinned, the road and the mountains and the column of warriors became translucent, silk held up to light, and through it she could see the other layer. The deeper layer. Where the first pack ran. They had the shapes of wolves but were made of something other than flesh. Light, mostly. Old light, the kind that predated the distinction between darkness and illumination. They did not speak in words. They spoke in something older than language, impression and memory and weight, things she felt in her sternum rather than heard with her ears. She was in the liminal for 11 minutes. When she came back, she was on the ground. Someone had her shoulders. She focused her eyes and found Kale Dawnraker kneeling over her in the dirt of the road, his warriors holding a perimeter at a careful distance. His expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Not frightened. Concentrated, in the way of someone doing something precise. He had one hand behind her shoulder. One hand on her jaw, tilting her face up. She blinked at him. "There you are," he said quietly. She became aware that her eyes were probably still red and that the silver black had crept up to her elbows. She started to push herself up. He helped without being asked. "What happened?" he asked. Not alarmed. Asking for information. She told him about the liminal. All of it, things she had never told anyone. Not the translations, not the cost, not the way the first pack's presence felt like being touched by something that had watched all of recorded history and found it small. She told him because they were 5 days from a battle she might not survive, and because something about the way he listened made deception feel discourteous. He was quiet throughout. Asking precise questions at precise moments. Never once flinching at any of it. When she finished, he said, "Every time you enter the liminal, you lose a memory." "Yes." "What have you lost so far?" She was quiet for a moment. "Small things." "My mother's voice. The name of the first wolf I ever met as a child." She paused. "The morning of my 16th birthday." He looked at her. "Was it a good morning?" he asked. "It must have been," she said. "I can't remember it." He was quiet again. "Then, is it worth it? What do you gain?" She met his eyes. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me after." He stood, offered his hand. She took it. He pulled her up with the unhurried efficiency with which he did everything, and then dropped her hand at the exact moment standing required no further assistance. A boundary, acknowledged and respected. She noticed it. "Walk beside me for the rest of the march," he said. Not a request, but not an order either. The middle territory between them that she had been learning to navigate. She walked beside him. And if her wolf had an opinion about the warmth radiating from his side in the cold mountain air, she was keeping that particular observation entirely to herself. The night before they reached the hollow peaks, the camp went quiet early. Evelyn sat outside her tent with the old texts, reading passages she had read 20 times, checking the translation one final time. The mountain air was sharp and cold with the particular clarity that came at altitude, and the stars were extraordinary, no light pollution from any pack settlement, just the full, unwashed dark of deep sky. She heard him coming. He moved quietly, but she had learned the specific rhythm of him, the particular weight of his step, the way he crossed spaces without announcing himself. He sat beside her without asking, which was simply how Kale existed in proximity to other people. He brought 2 cups and offered her one. She took it. Something warm and herbed and slightly bitter. She kept reading. He said nothing for a while. Then, "My sister once told me I had no idea how to be comfortable with someone." Evelyn looked at him. "She was probably right," he said. "I spent so long being something, an alpha, a commander, a symbol for 9 packs who needed something to believe in, that I stopped being practiced at being a person." She considered this. "I was never practiced at it to begin with," she said. "You spend enough years being feared and you stop expecting anyone to sit beside you voluntarily." He looked at her then. A long look, gray eyes in the firelight. "I sit here voluntarily," he said. She held his gaze. "I know," she said. The silence that followed was different from the usual ones. Fuller. More occupied. She looked back at the text. He said, "I need to tell you something before tomorrow." She waited. What Bricks confirmed last week, she heard the particular flatness in his voice that meant he was managing something. It wasn't just Dominion intelligence. He paused. Theron Voss was in the room when the decision was made to raid my Pax border 3 years ago. He knew it would breach the treaty. He facilitated the cover-up afterward. Evelyn went still. He was protecting the alliance, she said carefully. He was protecting his position, Cale said. And my mate died for it. She looked at him. I'm not telling you to do anything about it, he said. I know he was yours once. He wasn't mine, she said. He was assigned to me by fate and he chose otherwise. She said it clearly. Whatever I feel about Theron Voss is mine to carry. It doesn't change what he did or what you lost. He was quiet. I needed you to know, he said. In case tomorrow becomes complicated. I understand, she said. Another silence. Then she said, I've been losing memories for 6 weeks. I want to say something while I still have it. He went very still. She looked at the fire rather than at him. Easier that way. I have never, in 23 years, met anyone who treated my mind as the most interesting thing about me. She paused. Who argued with me because they expected me to argue back? Who asked the price of something before spending it? She could feel him looking at her. I didn't come here looking for this, she said. I want to be clear about that. I came here because the realm needed warning and I was the one who had to give it. I know, he said quietly. But I think, she said carefully, that whatever I survive tomorrow, I would very much like to stay. She finally looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she did not have a name for yet, not the professional stillness she knew, but the underneath of it. The person inside the commander. I've been trying very hard, he said, his voice low, not to want you here. She raised an eyebrow. I've been failing, he said. The space between them was very small. He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to move back, and tucked a strand of hair from her face with a care that was more devastating than urgency would have been. His thumb traced the line of her jaw and stopped at her chin. She leaned forward. The kiss was quiet. The first one. His hand moved to her face, cradling it with the same careful, precise attention he brought to maps and strategies and things that mattered. She felt her wolf, which had been failing and fracturing for 6 weeks, simply settle. Like a tide going still. Not mated. Not bonded by fate or moon or cosmic design. Just 2 people who had chosen. When they separated, his forehead rested against hers. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. They sat until the fire burned low, and it was the most at home she had ever been anywhere. The hollow peaks at dawn were the most beautiful and dangerous thing Evelyn had ever seen. The mountain range rose in sheer columns of gray stone, the passes between them so narrow in places that the sun reached the floor for perhaps an hour a day. The air tasted like minerals and old power. She felt the first spring before she saw it, a pressure in her bones, something like standing too close to lightning. The Dominion forces had arrived before them as expected. But they were at the wrong approach. Evelyn's translation had held. Cale deployed his forces with economical precision, holding the entry pass while Evelyn and a small group moved through the correct approach. Maren Solt at the front, blades drawn, moving like someone who had nothing to prove and no patience for delays. Warriors flanking. Bricks with his tablet, still logging things, as though the nature of the man was simply to document whatever happened regardless of conditions. And Cale at her side. She had expected him to stay with his forces. He had not. You should be commanding, she said. Maren commands, he said simply. I'm where I need to be. She did not argue. The gate was exactly where the text said it would be, a vertical crack in the mountain face, seemingly ordinary, visible only because of the faint shimmer emanating from within. The kind of shimmer that existed just outside the range of normal wolf sight. She could see it clearly. She placed her hands on the stone. The old script emerged under her palms. Lines of it appearing as though the rock were remembering them, the first Pax language, written in light rather than pigment. She felt the liminal rising to meet her. Wait, Kale said, quietly. Before you go. She looked at him. He held her gaze, steady and certain, the way he held everything. Come back, he said. It was not a command. It was a request. The most human thing she had ever heard him say. She nodded. Then she stepped through the threshold. The liminal was different here, deeper, more present, the first pack's light so thick she had to move through it like water. They were waiting. She felt them before she saw them, that old, vast, patient awareness, the weight of every wolf who had ever lived gathering into a presence that had no physical form, and all of them at once. She asked what she had come to ask. The Firstspring could not be held by force. They showed her this, a memory or a future. She could not tell the difference here, of the Dominion controlling the spring, the bond light and other packs dimming, wolves losing their connection to their own nature over generations. A slow extinction dressed as dominance. She asked what they needed from her. The answer was not words. It was weight, pressed into her chest like something physical. Seal the external access. Bind the gates so only those the first pack permitted could pass. And give the Firstspring guardianship, not to a coalition, not to a political power, but to those who had fought to protect rather than possess. The ironbound confederation. She understood. She spoke the words they gave her. The cost came immediately. Not pain, it never felt like pain in the liminal. More like a tide going out. She felt it leaving, an afternoon spent as a child in the valley below her pack's territory, running for the first time with real abandon, laughing. She had a half-second of knowing it was gone before the knowing disappeared too. She sealed the gate. The ground trembled, not violently. More like the mountain exhaling. The shimmer at the gate flared brilliant white and then went still. Outside, she heard distant shouting. She came back. Kale caught her before she hit the stone floor. She had not felt her knees going. She emerged into his arms, both of his hands sure and certain on her, and she realized she was shaking. Done, he said. Done, she said. He held her against him without ceremony or awkwardness. His hands were sure. The Dominion's forces, without the gate's power signature to follow, lost the trail entirely. They spent 2 days attempting every approach before withdrawing. They would not openly attack the Confederation without provocation, not yet, not in front of witnesses. Marin Solt sent diplomatic correspondence to 7 different council representatives before the Dominion scouts were fully out of sight. The record of what had happened here would reach the full council before the Dominion could spin it. That evening, they camped on the ridge overlooking the hollow peaks. Evelyn sat against a stone and felt the failing bond, which had been destroying her for weeks, simply stop. The fracturing had stilled. She flexed her hands. No patches of fur. No red bleeding into her eyes. The first pack's acceptance, sealed into the gate itself, had resolved what the failed bond had fractured. She was whole. Differently whole, carrying the grief of lost memories, carrying the weight of what she had done, but whole. Kale sat beside her. He took her hand without looking at her, in the particular way of people who have decided something. She laced her fingers through his. They watched the stars come out over the hollow peaks, and the peaks were dark and still and entirely, beautifully free. Spring had come to Ravenhollow in a way that surprised Evelyn every day, explosively, insistently, as though the mountain wanted to compensate for the length of winter. Vines had appeared on the fortress walls overnight. Flowers she did not yet have names for pushing up through the courtyard stones, birds conducting negotiations in the eaves with the seriousness of treaty delegates. She stood on the wall walk above the eastern courtyard and thought, mine. Not in a possessive sense. In the sense of belonging. The political year had been relentless. The full council had heard the evidence of Theron Voss's involvement in the Dominion's operation, and in the raid that had killed Lyra Dawnraker. He had faced censure. He had lost the Dominion alliance. He had submitted his resignation from the Ashvin leadership and was living quietly in a border settlement, which seemed right to her in the way that things that cannot be undone but must be addressed are sometimes right. She did not hate him. She had discovered this somewhere in the middle of winter. The vindication she had expected arrived more muted than she had anticipated. What she felt instead was something like the closing of a door she had stopped needing to be open. The Firstspring remained sealed to Dominion access. The Confederation held guardianship, an arrangement that had required 3 diplomatic summits and 1 very heated overnight negotiation that she and Kale had conducted together, trading arguments back and forth across a conference table at 2 in the morning while Maren Solt watched with the expression of someone being subjected to something she had not agreed to. She heard the door behind her. She did not turn. Kale came to stand beside her, close enough that his arm pressed against hers. "The Calcin representatives arrive tomorrow," he said. "I know." She had prepared the documentation herself. "Also, the southern border survey is finally complete. I read it. Your notes were wrong about the ridge elevation in Sector 4. He looked at her. His face did the thing it did now, the slight loosening of features that was, for Kale Dawnraker, the equivalent of a smile. "They were preliminary estimates," he said. "They were wrong," she said pleasantly. He turned to face her, which meant she turned to face him, which brought them into the comfortable close proximity that had become simply the way they occupied space together. "I spoke to Wren about converting the East Tower archive," he said. "More space for the old texts. Better light." She felt the warmth of that move through her, the thought of the texts properly housed, accessible, the first Pax language finally being read rather than gathering dust. He was watching her face. He always did, in the particular attentive way of someone for whom other people's expressions were important data. "You look happy," he said quietly. With a note in his voice she had learned to recognize, a note that asked without asking. She took his face in her hands, which was still, after months of this, capable of making him look briefly unguarded. "I am," she said. "Completely." He kissed her with the same attention he brought to everything, unhurried, certain, thorough. His hands at her waist steady and sure. Below them, the courtyard rang with the sounds of the Confederation going about its day. Warriors training. The kitchen sending something warm up through the cold morning air. Maren Solt's voice, somehow distinct even at this distance, directing something with her trademark precision. Home. Not the one she had been born into. The one she had moved toward, step by difficult step, through rejection and fracture and the terrifying gamble of crossing a border at midnight with nothing to offer but the truth. She had not been cursed. She had been in transit. Eclipse-born. Built for the space between things. For the liminal places where the old world and the new one touched, where knowledge could be carried from one to the other by someone who had learned, through a life of standing at the edges, exactly how to hold both. Somewhere across the realm, the Firstspring ran deep and quiet in the stone. And above it all, on a wall walk in a mountain fortress, Evelyn Ashcroft stood in the spring morning and let herself be exactly where she was. Finally. Completely. Irreversibly home. If Evelyn's story found you, if you know what it is to be told your difference is a flaw before anyone bothered to discover it was a gift, drop your country below. Let's see how far she travels.